My name is Sarah Van Dyke. I am an AFCCA clinician with Interwoven Connections, and I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Cindy to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, I'm Cindy Quinlan Maroney, another clinician at Interwoven Connections.
So today we're going to look at the aggression towards family and caregivers in childhood and adolescence, managing aggression at home toolkit. So last year, Children's Mental Health Ontario partnered with Interwoven Connections to develop the resource that we're going to talk about here today. Aggression towards family and caregiver in childhood and adolescence, also known as AFCCA, Managing Aggression at Home. Our hope in talking about this resource today is to help you understand, support, and manage your family's needs when your children and youth are expressing or exhibiting aggressive behavior at home. So we invite you to take a moment and to scan the QR code on the right of the screen that will take you directly to the resource itself. Children's Mental Health Ontario represents publicly funded child and youth mental health services provided across the province of Ontario. They also have a family partnership program called Parents for Children's Mental Health, also known as PCMH. PCMH supports parents and caregivers in a variety of ways, including peer support groups throughout Ontario, where parents and caregivers can connect and support each other. They provide trusted resources on their website, the Virtual Family Care Center, and through ongoing webinars just like this one. I wanted to mention here Interwoven Connections. Interwoven Connections is an organization that cares for families that have built their family through kinship, adoption, or customary care. We also provide a peer support framework. We provide support groups. We have a closed Facebook group. We have webinars, and families also can access supports when they're experiencing AFCCA in their home as well. So AFCCA, it is a bit of a tongue twister. Aggression towards family and caregivers in childhood and adolescence is described as a pattern of behavior in childhood and adolescence, characterized by aggressive behavior by the child or adolescents towards family or caregivers. This can cause significant harm, both physical and psychological, to the child, youth, adolescent, the person the behavior is being directed towards, and other family members that are witnessing this. So there are a number of ways that youth express aggression. It can be angry or aggressive outbursts towards their family members. It can be using aggressive language or posturing. They can physically injure others or themselves, threats of self-harm, as well as engaging in dangerous or risky behaviors either inside the home or outside the home. So why does AFCCA occur? Why does it happen? Humans, we co-regulate together. AFCCA can happen when there's a breakdown in the process of co-regulation. Many children can experience dysregulation due to a number of past history. They can have neurodivergence, such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, autism, or severe ADHD. All of these factors can cause children to struggle to be regulated at times of transition. Many children have additional sensory needs that lead them to be dysregulated in environments that are too loud for them, too bright for them. Sometimes children are managing at school and then they come home and they're unregulated after a day of all the expectations that kiddos have to do when they're at school. So there can be lots of causes for AFCCA. What are the impacts of AFCCA for families and children? So for the child and youth exhibiting AFCCA, feelings of guilt and shame, they blame themselves. It can really impact their mental health. A lack of confidence and diminished self-worth. They damage family relationships and connection and feel quite a bit of guilt and shame around that. There can be potential criminal consequences for their behavior, especially in the community. They can become involved or re-involved with child welfare services and systems. And the risk of having that behavior be more entrenched over time. For parents and caregivers and other family members, there can be a significant risk of psychological and physical harm, worsening mental health, secondary trauma from exposure to violence, judgment, exclusion, and isolation from other family members and the broader community. There can be increased risk of marriage breakdown, instability in employment, which can have financial effects on a family and further strain their family. There can be challenges to other children that are witnessing aggression in their home. So how can one prepare for incidents of AFCA? Nobody wants aggression in their home, and certainly we want to do all we can to prevent that. So practice managing stress. This is a challenge for many caregivers, many parents in this current world we live in. Please remember to try and build some restorative time for yourself. Try and befriend your own nervous system and know what gets you unregulated. Know what can help you feel more regulated. Build up your support network. Who in your family, who in your community, who in your neighborhood could help you when you're having challenging times? Who can support your other children? Families sometimes will have a code word. Families can get creative around how to support and ensure that everybody feels safe in the home. Regardless of AFCA happening, we need to ensure that we provide unconditional love and care for your child or youth. We can look at developing a family safety plan. We can develop a safety plan within our home, and then sometimes families will need to do a safety plan for when they're in the community as well. We can rally supporters, again, to support other children in the home. We can ensure that our pets are in a safe spot if a child is escalated.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing those supports and strategies and how to prepare for those moments, those incidents of AFCA. So we'll switch now to talking about and sharing about the supports that can be used in those incidents of aggression, in those moments of AFCA. It's really important for us to remember that in these moments of crises, that the child or the young person will not be able to hear, to understand, to process many of the words that we say, that they are not in a state to listen. So what we want to do is really slow down our speech and use fewer words to help them better understand and process what we're saying. If we go into that incident with really quick words, really fast words, that can actually escalate what's going on in that moment. So using fewer words and speaking slowly will help. Also, in those moments of crises, in those moments of escalation, the main focus is to de-escalate. So this is not the time to remind about consequences or to even try to teach a lesson here. It's not the time to say things like, you always do this, or just need to stop. Really, again, the main focus in these moments is about de-escalation. So what we can do in these moments is to provide clear choices and clear limitations. And in that way, the child, the young person can start to feel a little bit of control in a place that they're really not feeling control. And then, like Sarah talked about, implementing the family safety plan. So that's already figured out. Our brains are the same in that we have a really hard time thinking in these moments. But because that safety plan's been all written out, we want to know where that is. Everybody wants to know in that family where that safety plan is, what's included in the safety plan, so that you know in that moment, if this happens, then we're going to do this. There won't be any thinking, there can just be follow through. And then really important to know when to call 911. And again, that's going to be in the safety plan because you've already worked that out and everyone will know that it's in the safety plan. So you want to call that emergency help when there's a risk of violence, suicidal behavior, intent or immediate risk, self-harm, intent or immediate risk, or unusual behaviors that appears dangerous. Really hard and challenging things that we're talking about here, but having that clear plan will helpfully provide support in those moments. And also know that there are alternatives to calling 911 or having police interaction. So there may be some cultural considerations around them. So knowing locally what your alternatives might be, and again, having that outline in the safety plan is going to be really important here. What if you need to visit the hospital? So if the child or the young person is suicidal or threatening self-harm, you may need to go to your local hospital's emergency department. And again, knowing, and becoming more familiar with that resource can be really supportive in that moment, knowing what to expect and planning ahead, maybe even like going to the hospital, knowing where that emergency department door is, the parking, all of those sorts of things can be found supportive there for you. And what typically happens? So initially, typically, you're triaged. And what that means is the hospital personnel has come, they're assessing the situation, they're assessing the level of urgency, and then there's a determination as to who is going to see you. That's being triaged. Now, within this toolkit, there's an incredible tool, an incredible resource. It's called the Emergency Personal Information Sheet. And that can be sent by email and is found in this toolkit here. That is something that can be printed up and handed to whoever you're speaking with at the hospital. So it has information on there like any medications, any professionals, any supports about your child or the young person. And what's really helpful about that, again, is that we're not having to think in the moment, not having to answer all of those questions over and over. That can be traumatizing for caregivers, for parents. So just having that already filled out on a piece of paper and handing it to personnel can be found really supportive. After being triaged, typically what can happen is you're moved to a safe room. Your child, young person is moved to a safe room. And that's to keep everyone secure, protected from harm. If police have accompanied you to the emergency department, they will likely stay with until a mental health professional from the hospital comes to assess. And that's what happens next. So the mental health professional from the hospital, that could be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker. They can come, they're going to assess the situation. They're going to gather some information. Now, this can take some time. And again, knowing that, preparing ahead of time and being familiar with this can take some time, can help support while you're waiting with. And they'll likely ask you questions. They might need to call those who are following your child or a young person and just gathering that information. After that, a decision will be made, a decision whether or not to admit your child or young person or be discharged with next and follow-up steps. And here again, if you can think ahead of time, if you have that capacity to think ahead of time, or what are some questions that I want to ask this healthcare professional? What are some things that I need to know as far as next step? And that'll just, help you and not have to think in the moment there. So what should I do after an incident of AFCCA, after an expression of aggression? What should I do? We know that these incidences can be exhausting and draining. So it's really important that we take time to heal from them. Our bodies and our minds need time to rest and restore. And here we'll talk about restorative time. Restorative time is a practice. It's a way of deliberately prioritizing our own mental, physical, and emotional well-being. It's any activity or activities that allows you, the caregiver, the parent, to recharge and recover. It's really not about a list of getting things done. It's not this check-off list. Oh, this is what the doctor said. I need to call this person. I need to follow up with that person. It's not about that. What it is really is that intentional time of prioritizing your own well-being. So you may want to go for a walk. Maybe that's something that you find restorative. But if you're going for a walk and you're thinking about your child, your young person, and all of the things you need to do and what you need, that's not restorative time. So restorative time is really about being present, and it's a practice. It takes time to engage in this restorative time. Some other examples could be out in nature, like was just mentioned, and out in nature to take a walk and to notice the colors and to notice the sound of the crunching leaves under your feet or the calls of the birds. That could be restorative time that you would engage in. Maybe going to your favorite local coffee shop or the library. Maybe you find spending time in a library restorative, or connecting with someone who understands, someone who can come alongside and validate your experiences. Those are all examples of restorative time. Cultural activities may be part of that. Even music and art activities, especially ones that help you process emotions and feelings. So besides restorative time and taking that time to be calm and reflect, you want to reflect on the incident. And I say with so much compassion here, so much self-compassion here. And I think that as you reflect on that incident, if you need someone else, if you need a supporter to come alongside and reflect with you, then do that. Whatever it is that you find most supportive. And so you want to think about what was supportive in that incident? What wasn't supportive? What is something that needs to change to provide more support in that moment? So reflecting on what happened there. And are there any changes that need to happen? Any changes in that safety plan that need to happen? And just reflecting on them. We often hear from our caregivers the fear, and the question is, how can I make sure that this doesn't ever happen again? And that's a real fear because, again, these incidents can be overwhelming and draining and exhausting. So as Sarah had mentioned before, oftentimes in the description of AFCCA and the description of aggression, these incidents are oftentimes unprovoked. So we could be doing all the right things, and yet expressions of AFCCA can still occur. So we just wanted to make that point really clear. Some things that we could do, some practices that you might want to give a try, you might want to implement to help reduce the frequency, the severity of these incidents, are about having a structured and a secure environment. Knowing what comes next with consistency can be supportive for all of us, so that that structured environment is predictability, and it can provide connection in those moments and provide security. Another strategy is around addressing small problems before they become really big ones. And so if you're able to catch sort of those escalations at lower points, it may prevent further escalation. Finally, talking with your child or young person about the incident and opening up that conversation around the impact of that episode on them. And again, if support here is needed with this sharing, please do invite a trusted other to come in to talk about that. There's no shame here. It's really about how can we work together to better support you, to better support me, to better support us. So where can we get help for AFCCA? We've talked about the local mobile crisis teams and the local police services. And again, having those already outlined in your safety plan can be helpful. Other helps can be community-based child and youth mental health providers. And again, within this tool, within the Family Care Center website, there is a Find Help tool. Clicking on that will connect families, connect you to publicly funded child and youth mental health services in your own community. So clicking on that, you can find some resources that might be available to you within your community. And then, as Sarah had mentioned, AFCCA supports through Interwoven Connections. So we have both peer supports as well as clinical supports for families who are experiencing AFCCA in their homes and in their families. And there's also peer support that's provided through PCMH And so there's locations throughout the province, and you can find the details again on their website. And you can look at your location and see, is there a peer support connection that might be available to you? Getting that help and that support for AFCCA can really look to making that your home environment more safe or safer, improve communication, and strengthen relationships in your families. And we know full well there's a vulnerability in seeking help, and it can be really hard. There can be a shame and a stigma around that. So we want to make sure that we validate that and that we give voice to that. And I'm always suggesting, if you need help in getting help, then find another to come alongside. That might even be a peer support, someone to advocate with and for you around getting that help. When we look for getting help for AFCCA, there's a couple of things that we can keep in mind. We want to know if that support is AFCCA informed. So there's some things that you can think about. When I talk with this professional, this support, are they curious? They might not know all things about AFCCA, but are they curious to understand more? When I share a resource with them, perhaps, are they reading up on it, following through? Are they curious to learn more around AFCCA? When you leave their presence, do you feel seen and do you feel heard? Or is it like, I don't know if they really get it. But asking yourself, when I leave there, yeah, I felt like they validated. They may not get my exact experiences, but I really feel like they heard our family's needs in this moment. And is your expertise valued? So, you're an expert in your own home, in your own family, in your own situation. And so is that heard? Is the strategies you suggested, those that are helpful to your family and not so helpful, is that heard? Is that recognized? Is your expertise valued in that conversation? And if not, it's okay to not receive that support, or to at least consider that there may be an alternative to that support. And how about supports for parents and caregivers? We've talked about this before and this sharing here, but peer support. There is nothing like being able to sit with others who truly understand. And again, circumstances may not be the same, but the needs behind those circumstances can be. So sharing your experience with others who can validate, you actually don't even have to explain what you're feeling like, yeah, I get it. There's lots of head noddings. So being with others who truly understand is highly, highly valuable. I can't express more around the support of building your community of support. This takes time. And again, if you need help with building that community, it's okay. So many of us do. But who are those people? Friends, extended family members who can come alongside, who might even be part of that safety planning with you. So who are those trusted others that you can invite in to come alongside? And not everybody will have the same role. Not everybody will have the same information. You can actually cater the information you share and the supports you ask depending on the individual. Those are some options. And then practicing that proactive restorative time. It is a practice. And so if not just after crisis incidents, but proactively engaging in that restorative time practices can be found super helpful and super regulating for us. And then lastly, understanding the reasons behind AFCCA, understanding, having an awareness of why aggression can be expressed can help us to understand better the reasons behind, so that we can know not necessarily what we've done or what we've not done as caregivers and parents, but there is other possible reasons for that. And just having that understanding, I think, can bring a lot of compassion. Just wanted to share this quote that was shared by a parent. When I consider where we were at, there has been so many changes. I think we are better able to talk to people who can provide support, to us and let them know what is going on. We aren't alone. Thank you for letting us share.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cindy and Sarah. I really appreciate you both being here. We got a number of questions from families coming in before the recording of this webinar. And so a lot of the questions were very specific because, as we know, there are families all over the province supporting their kids who are exhibiting aggressive behaviors at home in a variety of ways, different ages, different diagnoses, differences neurodevelopmentally, and even their own different cultural experiences of how to manage things. So when we put all of these questions together, they're looking for the best way to respond to the aggressive behavior. And I wonder if diagnosis or age changes those strategies at all.
Yeah, I can start to speak to that. I think there's always a consideration with developmental ages and communication and behaviors and diagnoses, if they're related to, and I shared around some supports in the moments of expressions of AFCA. And I talked about how the young person, the child, is not in a state to listen. I think, and they're not able to hear most of what we're saying to them. So we don't want to come into those. I think looking at that information and how all our brains work under stress is really important to consider. So obviously, if I'm talking, to a 6-year-old versus a 2-year-old, we're going to think about those cognitive abilities, their developmental stages, and their ability to verbalize and how they communicate behavior versus verbally. So absolutely considerations in that. Again, I would, and maybe Sarah, you have some more to say around this, but thinking about the impact of AFCA and how it's really about the risk and the determination of the risk, right? And how we can manage that risk. Because when AFCA is expressed, there is a risk to all involved with that.
So I'm hearing a really important response is first identifying safety first. What's the risk here? Keeping words to a minimum. You talked about slowing down your speech and staying calm yourself.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, when my son had episodes like this, validating what he must be feeling in that moment went a long way versus redirecting him like, stop doing that, or why are you doing this, which really wasn't helpful, right? And we will all make those kinds of mistakes, but I love how you broke that down. And so really age and diagnosis doesn't necessarily change the steps that are in this toolkit. So I guess we encourage folks to look at the toolkit specifically and apply it to your situation. We had a lot of parents and caregivers who talked about doing this solo and wanting to know how to do this when they don't have a partner to trade off with. And I think that's the reality for a lot of folks. And we hear that a fair amount. So what would be your words of wisdom?
Parenting as a single parent can be so challenging, especially when the children are expressing aggression towards you. A really wonderful way to gather your community is something called rallying supporters. Sometimes families have talked about having a bit of a code word with a neighbor, another child. Another child will go and get the sugar from Lisa down the street. And this is something that's been predetermined when everybody's regulated, that the other child will go get sugar from Lisa down the street. And that's how we can ensure safety. But again, being a single parent is very challenging and even more isolating because it's just you. So try and rally those supporters that can support you in those moments. The other piece around AFCO, which we've talked about, is the shame. People often don't want to reach out because they don't want their child to lose any dignity. Children and youth are doing their best, but they do get unregulated. But in an effort to provide support for the caregiver, one needs to be open about what's happening in your home. Aggression in a home is always concerning for any human. So again, there can be a lot of stigma around sharing what's happening in your home.
And so I'm also hearing how important that family safety plan is as well as a part of that, even as a single parent or a lone caregiver, really having a plan, because if it's happened once, it is likely going to happen again. And I know it's hard to believe that, or you want to try to be positive, and it's not you being negative to thinking ahead and planning ahead. It's just being prepared and support. And that's a great way to support yourself as a caregiver too.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would just add around that restorative time, right? And that
Yeah.
practice. And it could start the simplest ways. And so that when you're in those moments, you can pause and be more grounded, and so challenging though.
No, I appreciate your insights in summarizing it. We had a lot of professionals reach out as well, and they were wondering what's the best way to support families when we're providing services and support. So, for example, at the intake level, or they're calling us and we're screening what their needs are. What can we do to support a family in that moment?
I would really hope for professionals to be open to what caregivers are saying. Be curious. As Cindy mentioned, curiosity goes a long way. I recently had met with a caregiver and she was actually crying quite a bit because she had never really felt seen before. Oftentimes, caregivers are so isolated themselves, and the aggression causes additional isolation that when anybody asks about these details, they get quite upset because they often feel like they're betraying their child, they're betraying their family, and they're really ashamed about what's happening here. Many of
Mhm.
our caregivers have read every book, gone to every workshop that they possibly could, and they're really still struggling with aggression. And as Cindy mentioned, you also could have the best safety plan with all the variables, and then something else happens and there's a variable that you didn't anticipate. The other thing about safety plans is it can be really nice to, if you need to, have one for in your home, have one for outside of your home. Oftentimes, caregivers that we work with at Interwoven often find it helpful to brainstorm with our peer connectors or to brainstorm with our staff about different options for how to keep everybody safe in those moments of aggression.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, as the professional, validate that caregiver, be curious, ensure they're safe, talk to them about how creating a family safety plan, and maybe even refer them to our family care center for those resources we've talked about today, including
Yeah.
peer support from either Interwoven or PCMH. I appreciate that. The last thing I want to just ask is one of the questions that was asked is, how do we avoid this at home? Period, simply. And I think I've heard you say this time and again, but I want to kind of wrap us up today with some final words on how to avoid aggression at home.
I think when I shared around, you may not be able to, the description of AFCA is unprovoked many times. And when I talked about having those environments that are secure and structured can help, really doing that proactive work, like all that preparation that Sarah shared about your own restorative care and grounding yourself and all of those things, so that even if the incidents of AFCA aren't prevented, that the impact of the AFCA and the incidents of
Mhm.
AFCA can be lessened. Yeah.
Communication is another big factor. Communication with your partner, with your supportives, with your young person. And a lot of times parents feel very guilty about taking restorative time. But we know that it's a difficult journey. And especially when children and youth are expressing AFCA, it can be even more challenging for parents. So
Mhm.
taking that time is the way to keep yourself well. And well parents can support their children in being well as well.
Thank you both so much. This is definitely a complex topic, and wanting families to just realize that they're not alone. There are a lot of families with kids expressing anger at home in a variety of ways, and that there is help out there. So thank you so much for your expertise today, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.